There we go.
Good stuff. All right. So,
Can you
hey
see me
Alec.
okay?
Yeah, I can see, I can hear you. Everything seems to be fine.
Cool. All right, cool. Should be
Yeah,
good now. All right.
hi. Yeah, how are you? How are you doing?
Good, man. How are you? What's your name?
My name is Maxime. So
Maxime.
Maxim, however you wish to pronounce it.
Nice. Nice to meet you, man.
Yeah, it's really nice to meet you too. I've been following you for some time on Instagram. Uh,
Nice.
yeah. Well, how would you say? Looking back at the past 2 years, you were a good source of like reasonable information, graspable, reasonable, rational information.
Appreciate that, man.
Yeah, it was really something. How did you perceive the past 2 years? Like it was a real mess. It was a real bloody mess, and it was really difficult to as far as I'm concerned, and looking back at the past 2.5 years, I found it in the beginning kind of difficult to sort out between what could be considered sane and insane, and later on having reasonable conversations with people without radicalizing too much into camps. And so that
Yeah.
I perceive that to be a much bigger problem as time uh, passed by, because as time went by, because even when you, like, we were kind of in a camp of criticizing the narrative and kind of trying to look at the different side of things. And so you still have this risk that's attached to whatever camp you find yourself in, that you can end up adapting a too radical perspective and excluding
Yeah.
stuff that doesn't fit your point of view. So
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a process of not self-identifying with
right.
the things that you have explored, or self-identifying with like the side that you're on,
Mm.
because that breeds tribalism, and tribalism absolutely breeds extremism in a way, because the more that you're self-identifying with your perspective, the more likely you are to defend that perspective, because it is your identity. And once you're
Mm-hmm.
in a position of defending your perspective, you're going to um, or some people will naturally become sort of disenfranchised with anything that exists, or any approach outside of that perspective. And that's the thing that is so important, is I think not self-identifying with anything of this world, except for the
Right.
process of exploring, the process of perceiving, the process of learning, the process of observing. Because when you do that, you will continually be open to new information, no matter which side of the spectrum it's coming on. Now, I say that with like, that doesn't mean we should just be open to anything anyone says. We should be open to hearing it, but should apply necessary skepticism to everything.
Exactly.
And that's the
Exactly.
difference. Is like, people will jump, be like, "Oh, you're saying be open? What? So we're just going to entertain ideas from Dr. Fauci?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's hear what he has to say, but we should be highly skeptical, especially considering the context of his past." But
Mm-hmm.
even if he didn't have that past context, we should still be skeptical regardless, because skepticism is what makes us explore the topic for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
If we're just blindly accepting it, then we're not actually, how do I put this? We're not solid in our own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always say this, like, for example, when people challenge me on virology, if they're
Mm-hmm.
using uh, logical fallacies, is what I see most often, either an ad hominem, so they're attacking me,
Oh, that's a
or a
good one.
bandwagon
That's a
fallacy
common
where they're
one.
saying, oh, it's such a common one, bandwagon fallacy, where they're, everyone believes in this, or appeal to tradition. We've always done it this way. Or they'll appeal to authorities saying, you're not a virologist, other people are, so you can't possibly know what you're talking about.
I mean,
And
look. It's kind of, it's understandable why people do that, and it's reasonable. I mean,
understandable.
look. as a default assumption, it's very simple and useful to some extent because you can't know and challenge everything. There's more stuff going on than you can perceive. It's like you need to refer to some default assumption. And if, oftentimes a reasonable default assumption is do what everyone does, believe what everyone believes, and just look out for people who seem to kind of show off some authority, and people who seem to be knowledgeable in that area of expertise, and that people who spend some considerable time of their career studying that topic. And so that's a great default assumption. The problem now is that this does exact. So there are kind of two problems here. First one, it doesn't necessarily mean that this default assumption has to be right. And now the question becomes, what do you mean by right? What do you mean by correct? That's a very complicated question, because we need to ask ourselves, first of all, what are the facts? And then complete different set of questions relates to what conclusions do we make out of these facts? That's kind of whole separate category. And that's what many people don't take into account when considering these questions.
Yeah, like of course, if someone spent 30 to 45 years as an automotive mechanic or something like that, and they say, well, you're not an automotive mechanic, Alec, then you, like an automotive mechanic, is going to know much better than you. More than likely, that is going to be true. Absolutely. But there's, again, a lot of context that is important when it comes to virology. Virology, what they're without even getting into the procedural methods of virology, and we don't have to go into virology unless you want to, but just as an example, and this applies, without getting into the procedure of what I'm even insinuating here about virology is operating on a lot of assumptions, and we're drawing attention to those assumptions that have not been proven, because the important thing with virology is that is the foundation for which everything else that has happened over the last 2 years, that will happen, that is to come, that has happened over the past 100 years, that is the foundation for which everything rests on. And if you're telling me that I need to do X, Y, and Z for my family and to my own body, you better damn well be able to provide foundational proof of all of those assumptions that you are making. If you're telling me that I need to change everything about my life, that we need to restructure society, people are getting fired from their jobs.
And look, that's kind of a whole separate category that you're now touching upon. So the first one is, what are the facts that we can grapple with, and what kind of this debate, the assumption that you were talking about. So what are the things that we want to prove, that we assume, that we put forward? That's one category. And something that's not, well, it is definitely related to the set of assumptions that we make, but it's kind of separate, and it needs some sort of framework to now make the right conclusions from this set of facts. Because this set of facts, first of all, it doesn't tell you anything. It's like, it's there now. Now what? So even if these things, regardless of their level of certainty, even if we assume that they are now proven and they're solid, rock solid facts, this still doesn't tell us anything about how we now what are we now to do with these facts. It's like they present themselves, and now, okay, like, let's say they're right about everything. Let's just assume that. That doesn't this doesn't at all mean that what has been done with these facts and the conclusions that have been drawn from these facts are correct. Because again, what do you mean by correct? By what standard are you trying to measure that? And what goal are you pursuing by drawing these conclusions? It's like you have to answer all these questions, because if you say, we want to reduce the amount of harm by these interventions, let's say, or we try to whatever, like, you first need to set up a goal, and then define the goal, define harm. Like, that's a complicated question. What is harm?
It is.
By which measurements are we going to assess harm? I mean, there are billions of factors that we need to.
The same thing can be applied even to, like, what we hear constantly when it comes to these mRNA products and all other, vaccines for the matter, is safe and effective. Define safe. What do you mean by safe? Define effective. what exactly do you mean when you say effective? Like there is no metric that has been put forward to say this is what we mean by safe, this is what we mean by effective, and we just hear it spewed all over the place 24/7, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, until it's entrenched into our psyche individually and collectively, and then we just jump on board with it, where without ever stepping back for a second and saying, again, if we're even operating under the assumption that virology is legitimate science and that vaccines are safe and effective, which I personally do not think either of those two are real,
Well,
but let's assume.
say, again, the question is, what do you mean by safe and effective? And what do you mean by true? What do you mean by evidence-based?
Yeah.
The one question is, does it accurately enough reflect what is actually happening? Well, no, because we cannot clearly see the things. They are too small. It's literally invisible to our eyes. Whatever is going on, we can't see it. So it's obviously not true by these metrics. Now, the next question is, are we able to draw conclusions from it and predict certain things? And I don't know, develop technologies based on this set of systems that are able to, I don't know what, like make certain predictions for the future that we can operate with. Yeah, to some extent we can. So it's true from that side of things. So again, what's true and what's not, what's evidence-based and what's not, what's legit and what's not. It's a difficult question to grapple with. And then a completely different set of assumptions that we have to make is concerning the interpretation of it now. Like, what are we now to do with it, with this? And that's a completely different problem.
Perfect example of that. So if we're trusting the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, right, as our authority on health in the United States, if we're operating under the assumption that they know what's best and that their data is not flawed, let's throw some of their. I say these are probably the three largest, like most glaringly obvious data points that would imply that we should focus on lifestyle, mindfulness, and nutrition in there. 95% of COVID deaths had an average of 4 comorbidities, most being lifestyle and nutrition related. 78% of hospitalizations were in overweight or obese people. The largest risk factors for death were obesity and fear/anxiety related disorders. And that's what you're talking about with the interpretation, and the implications of what that means. Okay, that data is straight from the CDC. How do you interpret that? How I interpret that, I think for the most part, how any person thinking logically without any preconceived notions would look at that and say, that shows me that it's people who are already metabolically very unhealthy who are struggling with this, and people who are living in perpetual fear. Interesting. So what we should probably be focusing on is not living in perpetual fear, and we should be focusing on metabolic health. Interesting. Why is it that what they're recommending we do is succumb to perpetual fear, be afraid of everything and everyone around us, whether they're directly stating that or implying it through what they're saying? That's another story. But the point is, all these measures that they're taking do not even kind of reflect at least what my interpretation would be, given their very own data from the authority figures, which is, it's interesting.
That's first of all, it's very interesting, and second of all, again, it's asking the question, what is your goal? Your goal is to produce as little harm as possible. Let's say that's or as alleviate suffering in the current situation, the current circumstances. So let's say that's our goal. Okay, great. We have a huge problem now. What does harm mean? And how are we going to evaluate that? How are we going to assess that question? Because there's millions of factors that can increase harm or decrease harm. There are a bunch of them. And first, we need certain endpoints to measure. Are we going to measure all-cause mortality? Are we going to measure only COVID-related mortality? It's like we can do that. Reasonable. But why not now take any disease of your choice and measure the endpoint of that disease mortality? Like, it's also a reasonable thing to do if we just make the proposition, we want to reduce harm, like define harm. Okay, that's hard enough. And now the second task is, what things can you do in order to produce as little harm as possible, or alleviate suffering, or decrease the amount of harm in the world in the current situation? You're there? Oh yeah, I lost it for a second. So yeah, that's kind of the question here. And you cannot, and that's the problem that I have with virtually every measure that tries to enforce something, to compel you to do something, or to restrict you from doing something. It's like you can make certain, you can make certain suggestions. You can say, rather do that.
Recommend you
But
do
like
this, yeah.
recommendations, but like compulsions and restrictions, that's a whole different set of games. And you should be very careful with that, because how do you know this exact intervention really reduces harms across all levels of analysis and across all these endpoints which you didn't even define? You know,
I'm gonna butcher these statistics, but this relates to your example, and I forget the exact numbers, but a survey was conducted in 20, like halfway through 2020, and the survey was on college age adults, and the survey was assessing suicidality and suicide ideations amongst that population of people, and in any given year, suicide roughly 1 to 5%, right? And during the middle of 2020, the suicide ideations had spiked to 25 to 27%,
Oh wow.
which is insane, which again begs the question of,
Yeah.
okay, what is the goal here? Is it to reduce harm? Is it to reduce suffering? That's a little strange because we see a 5-fold increase amongst college age kids in suicidal ideations, and that implies suffering. And then we see that they're, shutting down gyms. They're taking away your ability to connect with other human beings, and it's all based on compulsion and coercion, right?
Right.
Rather than, hey, we suggest you be careful of these things, you be mindful of these things, and that's without even uh, establishing whether those things actually work to begin with, which is a whole nother question. But the point is, you're absolutely right. It's if there is no clearly defined like goal and then also metrics to meet that goal
Exactly.
while accounting for all other variables, then you're destined to go on whether that's intentional or not. But but the point is, all we see now is the world in a greater state of dis-ease, greater state of disconnection, more divided than we were before. I mean, it's not, we are not healthier, let's put it that way, than we were 2
Exactly.
years ago by any
Exactly.
means.
And you just introduced another set of problems. It's like, we are we going to look at the factors and how they're going to change in the future? Because we can do that too. And you have no idea how they are going to change. And you have no idea how the interventions that you take now, the measures that you take now, how they are going to affect the health or harm. Like again, these are very vaguely defined terms. We have
Yes.
a rough estimation of what they mean, and it's more, kind of a visceral experience. Like, we know harm is bad, it's like it feels bad, but you cannot describe it by any set of random arbitrary factors and metrics and variables. It's kind of it's this equation, this list will be just, will be indefinite, will be completely endless. And so now we now not only have to ask, is it going to reduce and alleviate suffering right now, but is it going to do that tomorrow, in 10 days, in 100 days, in 10 years, etc.? And we don't know. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make. It's because we don't know, we should be exceptionally careful with every single one of the compulsions and restrictions that we put forward,
Amen.
because it's impossible to make any clear measurements and no calculations, you could say, about what is going to
Well,
happen.
yeah, and this is a big issue in my opinion with regards to science. So
Right.
we're operating again off of many assumptions, but off of those assumptions, we then take them and build computer models and simulations for them, which are very easy to manipulate for nefarious purposes if anyone has them. And let's exclude that from the equation here for a second, though.
Mhm.
But if we're making computer models and simulations based off of assumptions, and then we're then taking those and then restructuring the entirety of society based on those computer models and simulations, the fallacies behind that are endless. They are
Oh yes.
endless. And a perfect example of that was the initial predictions based on the supposed R naught of the virus, quote, spreading, which I don't
Mhm.
believe is a thing, but let's go there for a second. Let's entertain it. And I
Yeah.
forget his name, but it was Neil something. He was basically the guy at the beginning of 2020 that put forth um, the predictions based on models that he had made on how many
Oh,
people were
sure.
going to die. That was initially saying something to the effect of, after a year's time, 64 million Americans
Yeah,
would die.
something preposterous like that. It's
Exactly, and that's the issue. Is that initial absolutely ridiculous, because what we've seen in real life is that is not the case whatsoever.
mm,
Absolutely ridiculous assumptions that were then built into a computer model, which then spit out 64 million or however it was. That fear surrounding that, how it made you feel rather than what he said,
mm.
stuck with people. And then you continue the fear-based propaganda coming from multiple channels. So that's why, you fast forward a year later, and there's reporters going up to the people on the street. Some of them are my friends, I guess you
Right,
could say independent reporters, asking people, what do you think your chances are of surviving from COVID? And some
right.
people would say, oh, I don't know, only 50%. And then they
Yeah,
would hear,
I've heard of these statistics. They're like nuts.
yeah. And that's the point, is that operating off of the, like, restructuring society off of these is already bad, but then the way it conditions people through fear, and people latch onto that subconsciously to where they think they're going to die from this and then act on it, right?
Well,
Is
yeah, they acted out. I mean,
Yeah,
deeply, it's intrinsic fears of ours. It's deeply
yeah,
rooted, and it's an invisible thing. Like you don't even know you could have it, and you could die now, and you could, I don't know, you could spread it to your family, and they could die, and
yeah.
your grandma. Like you could be an evil person because you don't wear a
Telling
mask,
that
and
to
you
little
touch your
kids, telling that
grandma.
to like 2 to 7-year-old kids, saying like, hey,
Right.
you being around grandma could kill grandma. Like, it's horrible.
Right. And you don't know the long-term consequences and that this can carry on. Like you have no idea of that. It's like it's that's separate from directly measurable, like physiological things. Like people
Yes.
got more obese. It's like or hard. It's not a hard endpoint.
Yep.
That's not a hard endpoint. It's very, very difficult to define what we just discussed, what we just mentioned, this psychological, what would you say, kind of the subconscious change, the subconscious changes, and how this is going, how this gets influenced and changed and manipulated. Like you have no idea the outcomes that it can produce.
No.
Right.
No, and it's man, it is so nefarious. And then this kind of goes back to what we brought up, what we were talking about at the beginning, on like developing extreme positions.
Hmm.
When you are not balancing the act of self-identifying, and what I mean by this, with the self,
Hmm.
meaning you are self-identifying exclusively with you as the observer, the learner, the experiencer, rather than the things you've learned, observed and experienced, which makes you self-identify with a worldly identity, which makes you locked into a certain paradigm. If you're
Mm.
not balancing the approach that identifies with the self, also with which means you're open to more, you're open to learning, you're open to hearing all sides of the spectrum, with discernment and with skepticism, you are subjecting yourselves to exactly what we've had with this COVID situation for most people who have fallen for the trap, right? Because they don't know themselves, and they're also blindly outsourcing to people outside of themselves and latching on to those opinions to where it becomes their identity.
Right.
Then I think the people who are running the show know this. Like, they're acutely aware of human psychology and how easy it is to manipulate people in these ways. And it all comes back to being disconnected from yourself in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Yeah, but it's a very difficult thing to overcome though. Like I believe in some sense it's a inevitable uh how would you put it? It's an inevitability when it comes to human nature. Like
Yes.
we in some sense we have to identify with some ideal, you could say, like with
Yeah.
something that, like it. I mean, how else are you going to make decisions? You need something to base your value judgments on. There has to be a framework of, I don't know, assumptions, beliefs, values, something that allows you to make decisions and move, like do stuff in life. Otherwise, like, how else are you going to do anything and to believe anything? You're going to be wandering around and even looking at something. Like you look at a person, you need to be precise in what you're looking at. You need to exclude everything else. You discriminate all the time. I'm not going to look at everything else. I'm going to look at this one thing. I'm not going everywhere. I'm going at a certain place. At the same time, I'm thinking a specific thing. I'm not believing, like, it's difficult. We need to exclude and we need to identify with something. And there's a certain, if we dispose of everything that's not necessary, we come up with a belief system of, a hierarchy of certain values and
Yeah.
beliefs that helps us to move forward. And it has to be something. It's difficult for people to get
For
rid of
sure.
that in some sense.
Well, for sure. And like that's not even what I'm implying here. I'm not implying to not identify with anything. What I'm saying is we are born into this life with so much information impressed upon us, with
Mm-hmm.
so many traumas that we experience through adolescence and beyond, with information that is like pushed into our brains, with experiences that shape who we are, that maybe outlying experiences that not the average person like goes through in this lifetime. And what I'm saying is,
Mm-hmm.
rather than identify with those things that have happened to us, we need to sort through each of them and get back to understanding who and what we are. And what
Right.
I perceive that to be, and this is for each of you to determine, and that's the whole point,
Right.
is going through the process of like, who am I? Okay, why do I think that way? Why did I get angry when that person said that? Because like the person next to me didn't get angry, but I did. Is there something within me that I need to look at? That's
Yes.
weird. Was it something connected to this past that I experienced? Oh my God, it was. I got angry at that time when I was 6 years old, and that's carried with me till now and informs my decision making. It's that process of coming back to the self in a way that you are open and learning, right? That informs your future. And it's not that you're not
Exactly.
identifying with
Mm-hmm.
anything at all. It's that you are actively looking at, is this piece for me? Is it authentically me? Is this trauma that I'm carrying authentically me, or is it something that I merely experienced? Is this piece for me? Does this ideal sit well with me? Or,
Mm-hmm.
was me spanking my kid was that something that I was taught to do? Like, have I even thought about, like, I'm doing that to my kid now? Is that something that I authentically want to do, or am I just doing it because I had that done to me when I was younger? It's
Yeah.
that process
Right.
that I think leads us down the path that is correct. Always reassessing the way that we're thinking, always reassessing the things that have happened to us and whether they actually fit within who we feel that we actually are. And then again, being open to more experience, more observation, more learning, and more perception. That's what I think coming back to the
Right.
self is. That's what I mean by that.
And it's so funny that you mentioned the thing with feeling offended by what someone says or does. It's like, the whole cancel culture is based on that idea that, someone feels offended and that's why you're not allowed to say something. And that's like, you could not think of anything that's more appalling than that. It's like, where is the end of this sort of argument? You say you cannot say anything offensive, then just stop thinking, stop
Mhm.
existing. It's like your exist is an offense to someone in the room, or say whatever you think, whatever you act out actively. Someone will be there and ragefully, wishing to just break your neck because this person feels so offended by the fact that you are in this room. And so it's like it's funny that you bring that up, because if people would just, I mean, obviously sometimes people have some sort of evil malevolence that they just want to, for some reason, it's a different question why they try to project that onto you. But
Yep.
haters just that comment and hate for the sake of hating and being evil and being provocative, these sorts of people.
Mhm.
So sometimes there is real offense. Okay, it should exist because it can show you, it can show you something is valid. You are wrong. And oftentimes an offense can carry that information. Look, I'm telling you that for some reason, and maybe you're wrong. Maybe you should listen to that. And maybe you should even ask the question, why does this thing sound so offensive to me? Is it maybe because I'm wrong? Maybe because why don't I like this information? Why do I hate hearing that so much? Maybe because I've identified with a certain set of ideas, and I hate hearing that I'm wrong. It's like, yes, that might be true.
This is great. I see
Right.
I see that you fully get this. And what I mean by this is, like, again, going back to what I said, if you are secure in your identity of who and what you are, one, and two, you are just open as the observer, as the explorer, as the learner, as the, I guess, if you want to call it, or God manifest, or someone who's imbued with the Holy Spirit, that is here to explore, that is here to love, that is here to learn, that is open. You wouldn't get offended by what other people say. Now, with that, do I get offended by what other people say sometimes? Absolutely. So I'm still working, but I'm
You're a human
recognizing.
being after all.
Yeah, and I recognize that, and I call it out, and I say, like, I'm still learning. I'm still in the process of dissecting who and what I am, and seeing where I'm attached to certain identities and certain things. But at least I'm aware of it, right? And I don't
Right.
get as offended as I used to because I am aware of it. So when you're someone who is so overly insecure and you don't know who and what you are, one who may point out inconsistencies with your paradigm, or who may point out where you're actually just completely wrong and off base. And then here's the other thing with this that I've said recently, and I completely, I want to share this. So your belief is not bad. Like, belief is not itself bad. And there's a difference between knowledge, a knowing, and a belief. And everyone
Right.
has beliefs that they
Everyone has
carry
to.
with them.
I believe.
Yeah,
I strongly believe that this has to be the case. It's completely inevitable.
exactly. Everyone has beliefs. Here's the issue with beliefs versus knowing, though. When your belief about something, whether it be something about yourself or about reality that is, again, unproven or disputable, or
Right.
requires a lot of dissection, requires that I participate in your belief in
Mm.
order to maintain its validity, sorry, for lack of a better term, your belief can fuck off. Because
Right.
like, the moment that your belief, again, belief rather than a knowing, a knowledge, something that's well established, right? When your belief requires that I participate in it, your belief is now imposing its will upon me. I am not required to operate within the construct of your belief.
Mm.
Now, obviously, there's nuance to that. Obviously, like, if someone asks me, like, hey, I prefer to go by this now, like, I believe I am this type of thing, I can choose, like, okay, you know what, I don't want to have issues with this person, and I respect this person otherwise, so I'm just going to enter myself into their belief,
All
right?
right. Right.
But that doesn't always I guess the point is, you don't have to, you're not required to participate in someone else's belief systems.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great that you say that. I think you said it well there. If the belief requires, if part of the belief system is that you are required to adapt it to, and to accept it, and to act in accordance with that belief system that the other person, kind of put forward and tries to impose on you, well, that introduces a whole set of new problems. And maybe then, it's difficult though, because there are certain, I would say, overarching meta beliefs, you could say. And I want to hear your we'll come to that, because I really want to hear your opinion on, or your take, your views on religion and religious belief. Because I think if there is no overarching belief structure that guides your life, you, how would you say, you fall prey, you're more likely to fall into these pits of ideological beliefs and ideological thinking and these traps that just trap you in believing a certain sets of ideologies, because there's nothing transcendent, no meta belief that guides you in your life. And so I've I've been thinking about that a lot, and I've been asking a bunch of people what they think about that, because I'm yet to figure it out whether this is a thing or not. And if getting rid of a religious belief system predisposes us to finding, to adapting certain ideological beliefs and falling prey to them, and trying to impose them on other people, because we lack some overarching belief structure. So what would you say on that?
And this is good because, okay, so I'm going to touch on just for a second my spiritual perceptions, because
Right.
it'll give context for what I think. And this is so ironic.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that people thought like me and other people think, in that not everyone has to think like me and other people think.
Right. So
And it's
your
such
belief
a weird
system
paradox.
requires that it's not necessary to impose belief system on other people, and you
Yes.
wish that everyone would acquire that particular belief system, though.
Yes, which is such a paradox, because that goes back to like, or an oxymoron or catch 22,
I see.
because that's the point, is I don't, within my belief system, require that anyone else thinks like me. And
Mm.
that's what's weird. And I wish everyone had that as the foundation, but like, you know what I mean?
I
So
see the
so
problem, right?
it's such a
Conundrum,
problem, and
yeah.
it's funny. Yeah, it is a conundrum. I laugh about it quite a bit. So here's the thing. This is my spiritual perceptions. I
Mm-hmm,
believe
mm-hmm,
that consciousness, God, universe, source, whatever you want to call it, um, exists as us and through us, and at the same time is a separate entity above us. Right? It's like
mm-hmm,
there's a central spider web, and the center of the spider web is all powerful, supreme being that exists throughout time and space, and or exists outside of time and space, and that we are little points of that web that are inherently connected to it, actually a part of it, but at the same time, in this 3D reality, have the appearance of being separate and finite. And with that, we incarnate into this lifetime for the purpose of deepening consciousness and its exploration process, right? So we forget who and what we are. We forget that we are ultimately love, consciousness, God manifest in individual forms, because we operate on a plane of free will. And in order to make more authentic choices as an individuated portion of consciousness, we have to undergo that forgetting process. Because if we remembered that we were fundamentally an aspect of consciousness and everything else around us was too, we would never make a decision to infringe or impose or manipulate or gaslight or any of the things on another or on our environment, because we would recognize ultimately that our environment is not separate of us in any way,
mm.
shape, or form. And doing that actually infringes or imposes upon yourself. Now, with that, I believe that every one of us, again, is consciousness experiencing itself in an infinite number of unique ways, right? So
Right.
the worst thing that you can do if consciousness is attempting to expand and explore itself in an infinite number of unique ways, the worst thing you can do is impose your will, your individuated way of thinking and way of being and way of doing
Mm-hmm.
onto that of another. Because again, not only are you limiting yourself in that process, because you are that is fundamentally you, but also you're limiting consciousness growth and exploration process by trying to impose upon another. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, with religion in a broader sense, it's a little strange for me, because I think at the core of all the world's major religions, they're actually really saying the same thing
Oh,
in a
in some sense
in
they
different
do.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
But
sure.
with that, because they've people have self-identified with the procedures, with the rituals, with the thing, rather than the underlying essence of love. They have subject themselves to self-identifying with that, and then some people again try to impose that upon others because they're not secure in their own belief systems, and their belief systems requires other people to participate in it for it to be true. And that's where religion can be extremely dangerous. The underlying essence of it is beautiful. Dangerous when it is in the hands of man who, may or may not be trying to manipulate for nefarious intentions. I don't know. I have my thoughts. But the point is, they get people to self identify with that, the procedures, the rituals, the dogma of the religion that requires, again, absent of evidence, operating on assumptions. And that's why it is a belief, it is a faith, it is not a knowing that they are imposing upon other people. Going back to, if it's a belief that requires my participation in order for it to maintain its security, your belief can fuck off.
Yeah, I want to comment on what you just said about belief and acting on assumptions, because this again begs the question: what do you mean by true? If it's true or if it's not true, and that's, I find, an extremely complicated question, because nobody. Yes, it's unbelievably complicated, because look, you could completely reasonably object to everything that's being put forward in the religious documents by saying this is scientifically disproven, for example, or whatever is being described here, it's wrong. It's kind of from an evolutionary standpoint, biologically, it's wrong. But I mean, maybe that's not even the point. I mean, is that the point of religious documents? These people back then, they weren't scientists. They didn't try to prove a point. I believe that's not the point of religion. It's like there's stories being told. It's stories, it's abstractions, it's mythical representations of ideas and of ideals. It's like there's certain ideals, certain ideas, and ways to act, let's say, certain.
Exactly. And that's what you're touching on, is the essence of it, rather than like the strict adherence to the actual words themselves, right? Like in a literal
the factual
sense.
base. That's kind of not the point of it. It's what's being presented in the mythological sense. What do the stories tell? And I believe if you come from that perspective, and you simply understand that this document is the result of a collective endeavor to
make sense of reality, almost
to make sense of reality. Exactly. Maybe they didn't have the articulate capacity to write it factually, so that we can now, with our better intellectual capacity, understand.
And maybe and then the other piece too is that, like, let's take the Bible as an example. How many translations has it gone through? How many times has it been wielded in an attempt to take control of certain subsets of people across the globe? So how do we know? And well, we actually do know that books have been thrown out. How do we know that over time it hasn't been manipulated to be in such a form that is no longer representing the true essence of what it was supposed to be?
Good point. That's another good point. It has been changed, manipulated, and played around with in some manner. You could ask whether it was intentional or whether it happened all by chance. That's kind of a different question. But the result, the consequence, the conclusion, I believe, should be kind of the same, because people, I believe, I believe people were trying to understand why people act the way they act, and for some reason, and I still cannot find a satisfying explanation for why we have the capacity to do that. I mean, we think about why we act the way we act. I have no idea why we are able to do this. Like, no other animal does that. I tried to think of the evolutionary pressure behind, or kind of the reason why we should have adopted this sort of ability to question, not question, but to watch our behavior and to create stories that would include these behaviors on different dimensions, basically, and create heroes and characters out of these patterns of behavior, and then make stories out of that and present these stories, and they make sense, and they are not true in a literal sense. That's kind of the difference, and that's why the Bible shouldn't be read literally. And maybe it's even more true than that, because these stories, they present a whole number of different sets of ideas and belief systems and behavior patterns, etc. That's kind of my thoughts on that.
Dude, I think you're spot on. I don't even know if I need to comment on that. That was perfect.
But look, why do you think people have the ability to even think about that? Like I wasn't able to explain why this is the case. It's a mystery to me.
It is such a mystery, man. And it's kind of like relating it back to what's going on in the world now is that I think that all of us, again, have spirit in us because we are fundamentally spirit or consciousness, whatever, insert whatever name you want there,
Yeah.
exploring itself through free will. I think through various means of conditioning, and this may have been going on throughout history, some of us are so disconnected from our intuition and from that fundamental aspect of spirit that we are, and we're so caught
Right.
up in the materialism of the world, or the appearance of material world, that becomes fundamentally true. And then that's when it's harder for us to understand the nuances and then the subtleties and the essence of some of the things that are being said. And I relate that to what's going on with COVID, right? And that for people like you and I, it has become increasingly obvious that there is something nefarious afoot here, right?
Right.
Like it is getting to the point where it's like, okay, this is weird. And in many ways, yes, we can point to X, Y, and Z, like statistics, data, this, and that, to back our position. Of course, we can. But there's something more there that we can't really put our finger on necessarily. We just know that there's something so off about this, and we
It's on a
feel it
more
within.
fundamental level.
Yes, and we feel it within us. And there may just
Exactly.
be that some other people don't, and that may be that they are authentic, like as their authentic expression of consciousness, they just see this as, oh, this is actually good for humanity. Or it may be that
Right.
they are disconnected from that fundamental aspect of who they are. So they effectively turn it off, or turn off signaling to it, and again are going based on solely data, numbers, statistics, and missing the essence and the underlying subtleties that other people are picking up on.
Exactly. And I've written I've written an essay on that, because I was just thinking so much about that, and I couldn't help but just write it all down and just just comprise it down to something approximating a reasonable text,
Send it to me.
which
I would love to read it.
oh yeah, I'll definitely do that. It's called something like, it's on the question about, it was trying to solve the question, not solve the question, but to make the proposition, rather, that um make it it was more specifically evaluating vaccine mandates, and the problem that I see with that on a way more fundamental level than just, is it
Beautiful.
like whatever, saving
Like,
people.
is this proven to be safe, or is this proven to be
Like,
effective?
that's not
No,
even the
that's not even the
question.
right
That's not even the
question.
question.
Exactly. Yeah,
I wasn't even talking that much about the mandates themselves. It
exactly.
was like,
It's
look,
so much deeper than that.
what happens if we start compelling people to do certain things? Let's just play with that.
Yeah.
And that's the argument I'm trying to make. Let's take your damn argument and expand it to ridiculous dimensions. Because,
Yeah.
and why you should do that? Because, well, that happens sometimes. You start
Yes, it
with
does.
one little intervention, and then you add another little intervention, and you expand that. And you expand and expand and expand that, and suddenly it's instantiated on every level of, like, life, literally. And so
And
that's why
people
I
will
try to
say
do
that that's
that.
a slippery slope fallacy, which, yes, it is true. It's a slippery slope fallacy. Absolutely. But what have we seen over the last 2 years? It is
Mm.
a slippery slope. It absolutely is a slippery slope. I mean, what's going on in Shanghai right now
Oh
to
man.
human beings is absolutely absurd. So these things do happen when you continue to say that this is justified, this is moral, this is ethical. Again, without even bringing in that they're based on assumptions that are unproven, so
Right.
really are based in many ways on belief. You're absolutely right. It is so much more than, has this product proven to be safe? Has it proven to be effective? Now, do we argue in that realm? Absolutely, because we show
Mhm.
very harms that are already known and some that we don't even know about years down the line. Are they effective? Definitely not. I would say that's very clear by now. But the point is, that's arguing up here. Like
Exactly. That's on
we're
a very
talking about
superficial level.
exactly. It is so much more superficial than the underlying argument on imposing one's will on another and compelling people to do things against their own will.
Exactly. And then I try to separate restrictions from compulsions. And I believe restrictions, and I always try to stress the importance and significance of being extremely careful with every single intervention that a state tries to impose on the citizens,
Yeah.
because it can degenerate into tyranny very, very quickly. And I mean, it's like we have examples, and not even historical. We have like North Korea and Shanghai. It's like, here you go, just look outside the window and you can see it right in front of you. You don't even have to learn about history and what happened in the 20th century. It's like you could do that and you'll be terrified of that and you'll be extremely careful.
Yeah.
But it's like we need restrictions, and that's reasonable, because otherwise you cannot play a game. So it's like, let's play. Have you heard Jordan Peterson?
Yes, I love Jordan Peterson.
Oh, I'm a huge admirer of Jordan Peterson. But one example that he made with that restriction thing and why ultimate freedom is stupid. It's like, okay, Alec, let's play a game. You go first. Ultimate freedom. Do whatever you want. No rules, nothing. Let's go. You go first. And it's like,
Yep.
you're lost. What should I do
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. What do I do? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
whatever. Like, I'll do nothing. And so you need some set of rules. You
Yeah.
can't do that. You can do this. And then you're able to act. So restrictions are okay in some degree, and you should be extremely careful with that too. But it's a different discussion.
Yeah.
But as far as compulsions go,
But they
and
are necessary. Just real quick to comment on restriction.
right,
Again, I think like basing in there's going to be nuance depending on the location you live and then depending on the situation, but essentially it comes down to what intention for what you are doing, like what is the actual intention for it, and then are you abiding by the principle of do no harm to others and do not infringe upon others. And I think those are two really good starting points. And that's where it's like you have to bring intention into it, because I mean, maybe I was
exactly,
cooking a meal in my home and my like kitchen exploded and my neighbor next door, their house caught on fire. Did I intend to do that? No, I was trying to make something. I'm just a horrible freaking cook, but I incidentally infringed upon another. And that's
right,
where, again, bringing it back to, okay, how to go to my neighbor and seek remedy and say, hey, I have committed harm against you. Or if they came to me and said, hey, you have burnt my house down, I would like you to make this right. I would like to seek remedy with this situation. And then you
right.
solve it. But restrictions are absolutely necessary. And I think as long as they're operating with those two things, that's a good starting point.
Absolutely, they are necessarily, and I made this totally clear. However, you bring up the point with intentions, and that's also an extremely complicated question, because how do you, again, it's coming back to the number of variables that you would need to put into that equation to come up with a result that would tell you whether this is good or this is net positive or net negative. Like,
Mm.
how do you know? How could you possibly know? It's extremely difficult. It's Nobody would be able to take up that massive responsibility to calculate every single damn thing that you do. Because, and I bring up, I was describing a very, very simple example that everyone could relate to. It's like smoking. So you cause harm to your body, fair enough, and you could make a initially you could think it's harm and only harm to only your body, and you don't like impose anything on anyone. Fair enough. Now somebody watches you and thinks something, and this has an effect on the way the person thinks. That's kind of on a very deep level. But someone could breathe the air you produce with the smoke. It's like that harms the person's health. On
Yeah.
all different levels, it produces unintended consequences and effects. unintended. It's like, regardless what your initial intention was, like no one knows why you decided to smoke. It's like up to you. And I believe that's the reason why we should be extremely careful with any sort of restriction and compulsion, because, well, why do you know? How do I know why you decided to do something? It's like, it's based on your internal belief system that is a result of your experiences and interactions with people.
Yes. Yes.
It's so damn complicated. And man,
This has been a freaking fascinating conversation already. This is incredible,
nuts.
dude. Because lately I've been on podcasts talking again about more of the data, the science, and like it's important.
Well, that's
but
clear, man. Like we are past that. We know this.
yeah, yeah, we're like,
But
how
it's
did
like
this
talking
happen? Like,
about this over
why?
and over
What
again. It's
led
like,
to it?
yeah, lockdowns don't work, and we need
I
vitamin
know.
D and this and that, and I don't
Yes.
know, children are suffering. It's like, guys, we got it.
We get it now. Yeah. Okay. So how do we let's talk about the more fundamental things so we can ensure that something like this does not happen again. Let's start having those conversations.
Why
That
do you think, and I really want to hear your opinion on that, why do you think people are so outraged if you bring up examples of the past? You know what I mean? It's like, we had examples from the past. They'd be like, you're a Nazi now. What the
dude,
hell?
which is just so crazy to me because I'm assuming you're in Germany, right?
I'm Germany, exactly.
Okay. So
I'm from Berlin, yeah.
awesome. I lived in between Dusseldorf and Cologne for around 6 months actually.
Oh, really?
At one point in time, I did. Yeah, I did.
Oh.
I played handball for TSV Bayer Dormagen.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I
that's
had the
funny.
big Bayer logo on my jersey, and yeah,
We'll talk about what you do in your past, but just let's
yeah, yeah,
continue
yeah.
with that
Let's
discussion. It's super interesting.
why do people get so upset when you bring up the past? Because people, when you're bringing up the past to give people an example where they are either unaware of, directly supporting, or directly acting out something that relates to a horrible thing that was done in the past,
Or willfully blind.
or willfully blind to it. Again, and this is where just bring up intention again can get scary. I don't think for the overwhelming majority of people who complied with and also pushed what went on these last 2 years are not intending to commit harm. They have been manipulated, and they have, had their psyche captured into this belief system that they are now believing in, and they're identifying with that belief system. And when you try to show them the inconsistencies in their belief system by using past examples, people don't want to think of themselves as anything other than the hero in any
Oh man.
situation that has an opposing force versus another force, right? People want to think that they're on the side of good. So when you bring up the possibility that they are doing something or actively participating in or completely negligent towards or not failing to look at the things that are for people like you and I directly related to very similar scenarios in the past, people don't want to look at that, don't want to have to go back because that either puts them in a state of cognitive dissonance, A, or B, they really do just think of themselves as the hero in this situation, as the virtuous one, as doing what is morally justified and ethically responsible. That's what they think. So when you bring up the past
Right.
to relate, it's too much for them.
It's exactly, yeah, it's maybe exactly that. So they act on the basis of virtue signaling, and I don't know, they mask whatever it is that they mask with this expression of virtue signaling. I'm acting, it's like for the victims. It's always the same thing. There are people that are
And then they
suffering, and
project
I
though,
support
too.
them. I'm not suffering though, but all these people are suffering, and I'm support them with all my might. And now, if you now bring up the examples, like, look, your ideology drove something that led to the deaths of millions of people, and so this is in direct and not just contradiction, but it's like it flies into their faces. and it would destroy their belief system completely.
Yeah.
And so it's not just, it's like cognitive dissonance is a euphemism to that. It's
It
something
is.
way more catastrophic for these people if they would voluntarily encounter that and try to actually sort it out. Like, is there something? Maybe these people are right. Maybe they're correct. Maybe I should rethink my model that I'm basing my actions on.
And doesn't it all go back to identity though, right? Because again, if they are secure in their own identity and they're just open to further exploration, perception, learning,
Mm.
experience, they're not going to be and maybe it can be framed in a way for those who are posing like, hey, have you thought where this is wrong, where you're not attacking that which they're currently identifying with. You simply say like, hey, isn't it a little weird that this is leading to this direct harm, or have you thought about this data point? The point is though, for
Mm.
someone who's secure in their own identity and open, right, in a
Mm-hmm.
number of ways, they're not going to be offended when you bring up past examples. And more than likely, again, if they're not outsourcing critical thought to someone outside of them and believing exclusively in the leader from their side that they've made their identity, they'll
Mm.
actually be able to back up their perspective. And you'll always know by how they argue. Again, going back to what I said, if they're using logical fallacies to argue, they don't even fully understand the position based on what they have perceived and experienced up to this point and what they have learned. They don't understand. If you can't argue it without going into logical fallacies or
Right.
parroting phrase or some words of a politician or a government official or corporate individual outside of yourself,
Right.
then that shows me you're not actually solid in your beliefs.
And the huge problem that I have with exactly that is that the to say that it's so ridiculous though. It's like cancel culture just accelerates that problem. And
It does.
you know, it's like I can't wrap my head around it because it's so ridiculous. It's like you should, in order to understand whether your belief system is actually correct, you should try to attack it from as many sides as possible and to
Amen.
actually talk to as many people as possible with opposing viewpoints and try to find out whether your belief or whatever, your opinion, whatever you think, still can withstand this this criticism that you're trying
Bro,
to put forward. And
this,
they actively go against that. They'd be like, no, this offends my miserable position, my victimized
yeah.
pathetic position, and that's why we need to
Yep.
cancel your position.
Well, dude, this is exactly why, like, just to like, give myself some credit here. The things that I say, so often when I write them after having reflected
Hmm.
on the side that opposes the way that I'm seeing it.
Hmm.
Because I try to craft it in such a way where it's almost irrefutable regardless of the position that you're coming from. It's like,
Nice.
damn, like I believe in vaccines and I believe that masks are good, but the way he framed this, like there's no argument there. And it's because I try to put myself in the shoes of people who think differently than me. And
It's a
see how
great
they
it's a
could
great approach though. It's a great approach to writing, to speaking, to like formulating argument. It's like, how can I demolish my argument?
yeah.
What's the best possible ways that I can attack my arguments from every single side, to strawman it, to like whatever, appeal to authority, whatever you like, everything you
Yep.
like, just attack it and destroy it.
And that's why
It's a
I'm so
great
big on
approach.
logical fallacies too, man, because uh, you know, again, not only did I used to get offended when people would
Hmm.
attack me, 2 years ago, which I don't get offended at all anymore on that. Oddly enough, though, and this is going back to identity, um, the one area I do get offended is
Hmm.
it's not when people who disagree with me call me conspiracy theorist or say that I'm a baby killer or grandma killer or this or that anymore. I truly like do not get offended by that anymore. Like I laugh at it most of the time, and I'll get to that. on identity, what I do get offended by, and I know that this is a reflection of something I need to heal within me still, and I need to look at,
Exactly. Mhm.
is the people that are within my own tribe that criticize the way I do X, Y, and Z. The people that I'm
Mm.
like actively trying to help on this side, so to speak. And that's because of some childhood trauma that I dealt with. I'm aware of exactly what it is, feeling rejected by my own parents. So
Mhm.
anytime I feel rejected by someone who I see as part of my tribe, that's something that still gets to my core. Now,
I see.
going going back to why I don't get offended. I've kind of already touched on this, but it's just so funny. I actually like when people outside of my perspective attack, again, my perspective, not on the basis of its argument, but on the basis of the logical fallacies that support that which they identify
Right.
with,
Mhm.
right? I know that they don't actually have an argument to bring to the table whatsoever. So when people
Right.
attack me now, I actually laugh like most of the time because I'm like, okay. And what I do in response to them, if I do want to entertain it, most of the time I don't entertain it. But if I do want to entertain it, I'll bring it back again to the evidence that supports my position, bring it back to the logic that supports my position, and simply ask them if they have any counter position or any counter evidence or
Right.
any logic to justify their position. And it's so funny because in literally every single case, except for a couple, they resort back to logical fallacies again. And it's like,
Right.
okay, you're clearly showing that you don't even understand your own position. You're
Yeah.
just blindly believing in an authority outside of yourself and what they're telling you to do, which
Well,
shows me you don't know yourself.
that's the definition of an ideologue. You could as
Yeah.
well talk. You don't even have to listen to that person. Like you can listen to one sentence and you can already think of everything else that the person is going to say. It's like it's always the same thing. You could
When
just as well to listen to anyone else. It's like
yes,
the same sentences, the same wording. It's safe and effective. It's like whatever comes out of them.
dude, and it's it's funny because like I don't like to lump people in categories too much, but if I see someone that has like, this is gonna be messed up, but you'll get what I'm saying. Someone that
Mm.
has blue hair and a mask on in their profile picture, and then they call me a QAnon Trump supporter, I immediately know like everything thereafter that's going to be said. So I'm just like, there's no there's like just no point in talking to this person because I
Yeah.
know the position that they're coming from.
It's like, look, it's I mean, I think it's like you should, and I'm a big believer in that. You should approach every human being with keeping their individual dignity and kind of
Yes.
the 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 fact that they carry certain special well, a certain special and unique set of belief and identities and etc. So that's true.
Yeah.
You should approach every human being with that. However,
And
the probability that if you encounter, there are certain sets of beliefs that often run together. And so if you
yes.
encounter one of them, the probability that this person will also manifest and act out the other beliefs and the other propositions, let's say, it's very, very high. So you just make that assumption and then you can test it out, and oftentimes it holds true. So
Dude, it does. Like I'm going through all the examples in my head of like, you then go click on that person's profile and what their bio says is always going to be some variation of the exact same thing about like Black Lives Matter, although that they've never actually had a black
and
friend in
man,
their
don't
entire
don't
life.
forget the pronouns though.
That's what I was just about to say. The next one was going to be, there's going to be something about pronouns. Like, dude, it's always maybe now something about supporting Ukraine outright. Like,
Yeah.
it's always the same camp. And I don't want to say always, it's not exclusive, but it's like you're absolutely right. They're
Have
generally
you have you
running
ever
along the same
had
line.
have you ever had a reasonably um well, what's a good word to use for that? But actually a reasonable an actual conversation with someone with someone from from the opposite side, let's say on a COVID issue. Have you ever had a discussion with someone who didn't agree with your position, who didn't um who didn't try to refer to any logical fallacies and
I
stupid
have.
like strawman arguments and but actually provided you with some information, didn't call you names? Have you had that?
I have, absolutely. I actually have. And it's a really refreshing conversation because by the end of
I
it,
feel that, yeah.
we by the end of it, we both mutually respect where each other are coming from because we know that we're actually both well intentioned. We just completely disagree on a number of things, right? And that's totally fine. And they have logic to support their position that I don't personally agree with, but it is logical. And putting myself in their shoes, I could see where they think that to be true, right? Given the context of their experiences, all the things, I could see where they think that to be true. But what's beautiful about it too is, at the least, we agreed that no one should be able to impose their will upon that of another, which is huge. So ultimately, like, if we can
Well,
agree on
ultimately,
that,
I
then
would
I
say
don't
you
care.
agreed on more than you disagreed on.
Exactly. And that's the point. But that is rare. That is very rare to have conversations like that.
100%.
And but it's not rare even, like, with that side exclusively. Like, it's rare with people on, that think like you and I. A lot of them now, and I've said this over and over again, it's really frustrating. People who are blindly outsourcing to, the mainstream medical system, mainstream
Mm-hmm.
science, all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
the government, who have woken up to the corruption on that in some way, shape, or form, now blindly outsource to Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Robert Malone, to X doctor, insert any so-called expert on this side of the spectrum. Even some people outsourcing to me, and they don't even understand their own argument, and they're just parroting what people on
Well, yeah, it's
this
the
side
same
of the
thing
spectrum
from the
say.
opposite side of things,
Yes. And
but it's the
that's just
exact
as
same
bad.
process.
Exactly. And it's just as bad. And that's, again, like, I am much more respecting up examples and break down why they think the way that they think, because that shows they've gone through those processes and even, offered opposing perspectives to themselves to sort of dissect and get down to the root of what they truly believe in, right? I am much more respecting of someone who is like that thinks completely differently than me, than I am of someone who says they're on my team, but they can't even tell you why. They haven't thought about any of these things for themselves. That's really frustrating because it's missing the point entirely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, making me think, man, because I've also had these conversations, extremely rare instances though, but um as you said, like, and I've also had similar encounters that you just described at the end about those who just were, just as you could make these predictions about people who had one set of belief, and you could make certain predictions about the rest of their identity and their belief systems, you could also do the exact same thing about those people.
Yeah.
And also find that sometimes extremely frustrating, because it's just as difficult to have conversations with these sort of folks. And yeah,
It is.
it's kind of a hard thing. And I I think I think ultimately it comes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. It's like, if you approach conversations and life in general with a spirit of exploration. It's like funny. I was in my entire podcast career, let's say, I personally was invited on to 2 podcasts, which is cool. Like, I like to be invited on to shows. Very unfortunately, it's have been just 2 now by now. But on the one show, um, we were talking about a bunch of things. But one thing that she was asking me, and it was a great conversation that I had with that person, was about the name of my podcast, which is Sapiens Playground. And I alluded to the to the idea behind playground. It's like common ground. People meet, play, talk, and
Mm.
explore. That's what children do. They don't understand the world. And it's like, that's where you're coming from. And I try to elaborate on that. And I'm trying to come from that same place. And
Yes.
it's really cool. It's so funny. It's extremely funny to have conversations if you actually come from that perspective. You
Yes, dude.
stop
It's
you
oh
stop
man.
judging people for who they are. You actually listen. And then some time ago, I encountered Jordan Peterson, and one of his rules resonated so unbelievably deeply with me, which was, I believe, assume that the person you're talking to knows something you do not know. So,
Love
and
it.
this rule is like, yes, man, and I tried to embrace that wholeheartedly, and that's the thing. It's like, you might not know something, you're the explorer. You have
Yes.
no idea. You're looking at the world from that side of things, and you continue to learn, you continue to explore, you're playing in some sense, and you don't care whether you win or lose, because either way you're going to grow and expand. That's a good thing, man.
Dude, and it's you look at everyone as your teacher. You know what I mean? Like everyone
Right.
in every situation is ultimately teaching you either something about yourself or something about the nature of reality or something about your interaction between yourself and the nature of reality. So both. And that's beautiful when and again that requires not that you completely get rid of your identity. That's not, again, I want to be careful for anyone listening. I'm not asking anyone to get rid of their identity. Identity is required, like their individuated identity, their ego, if you will, because that is required to differentiate between you and others in this
True.
illusory reality of perceived separation, which, like, I look at people trying to transcend their ego completely, try to transcend their identity completely as someone that is missing the point, because we came down here as individuated portions of spirit to experience finite reality, to experience separation, but also, in my opinion, return to the understanding that, although I'm in this experience of illusory separation and what appears to be a finite reality, I am not that, but I'm here to play in that world for a little bit, right? And so absolutely, we need identity. I'm just saying, know that your fundamental identity is not this, and it's not any of the things that you have explored, the things that you have perceived. They inform you on your reality, but they are not you fundamentally. And when you
Mm.
understand that, then you can continue to explore and perceive in a more open way. And you're willing to learn in every single situation that you're presented with.
Yeah, the difficulty I think that arises with that, and just to play devil's advocate from the from
Please do.
well, not like devil's advocate, but just the clear reality of why this presents itself with some difficulties. It's like you have adapted a certain set of identities and beliefs, and now by exploring, you're entering a territory of potential danger. It's like you might be wrong. That's what you do when you're an
Mm,
explorer. You enter a territory of unknown, something which are not aware of yet.
yep.
And this can be frightening. It can, it can, and it can, what it also can do is pose an attack towards some of your fundamental belief system.
Can I
Because if
share that
that
one an
happens,
example with you? Can I share an actual example that
sure,
I'm
please go
experiencing right
ahead.
now?
Please
So
go ahead.
so this book was transformational in my life. It's called The Law of One.
All
Again,
right.
I'm usually not the type to read like channeled material or I'm not big on like woo woo 3D to 5D things. I'm a very spiritual person, but it's more like grounded in the earth.
I see.
But but anyway, that book I've read now 3 times, and it's
Oh, wow.
transformational in my life. And without divulging too many of the details of the book, uh, it operates under the premise that we are life that is harbored on one planet, and that there is life of different densities of consciousness. So there's, even as an example, life all around us right now that we can't see because in our limited human capacity with the senses that we have, we cannot actually see them. And it kind of goes in line with the Fermi Paradox. I'm not sure if you've heard that, but the point is
Yeah.
that there's life on all planes of existence all around us, and even on multiple other planets that are all, and it obviously is, the book is based on the heliocentric model, right? And I was one that always, first off, made fun of flat earthers, also admittedly not exploring that myself. And this is what I'm talking about, being open to exploration. Do I know that the earth is flat? No. Do I want it to be flat? Absolutely not, because again, this book makes so much sense to me, and this is where I've caught myself. I've self-identified with much of what this book is taught. One of the big pieces that the book teaches, though, is the principle of not imposing your will upon others, because that's the book that really shares the fundamentals of consciousness that I've shared throughout this episode. But the point is, I have now, again, being open to exploring into dangerous territory, even venturing into something that may go against what I hold to be true fundamentally. an aspect of that book, I've been venturing into the possibility that the earth is flat. And I got
Mm.
to say, there's a lot of compelling evidence. There's a lot of compelling science surrounding it. And then this is the one thing that has stuck with me on this. If I were plopped here, and let me preface this first, full acknowledgement that my perceptions on a situation, my exploration, my experiences, what I can gather with my five senses, does not imply that that is the objective truth. That is what my subjective truth is. Now with that as context, right? If I were plopped here without any preconceived notions or ideas on what the shape of this existence is, I would have no reason to think that I am on a ball that is spinning, that is a globe hurling through space.
Right.
I would think that I'm on a flat plane of existence. Now, again, going back to what I said, am I limited in my capacity to perceive? And does everything that I experience and observe, is that objectively true? No way in hell.
Yeah,
No
that's kind of
way
the
in
problem
hell.
that you run into. Yeah.
Exactly. But the point is my exploring the possibility, and I'm very much sitting in the I don't know of what the shape of the earth is. And does it really matter that much to me? No, it doesn't.
Well,
But it's
that's
just
that's that's what I would say. What I would say to that. Why I don't even bother that much. It's like I just buy whatever the people tell me about it because I don't care. I genuinely don't. It wouldn't
yeah, it
change
doesn't
a
affect you.
bit
Yeah.
about the way I interact with people, the way I think about everything that I think about right now. It's like it doesn't really matter to me. It's like it's the way it is, and I can't change it. I can't influence it. I
Yep.
can't. It's just I have to accept a certain reality, and it's up to me in some sense. And why should I even bother exploring that territory if you know what I mean?
Well, and I think it's like the beauty is that again, I recognize that this, like whether it's flat or not, is ultimately touching on something that I have caught myself identifying with, right? Like identifying with the teachings of this book. So like I don't want the idea of flat earth to be true, but I'm exploring it in depth because I want to dissect my own beliefs and
Right,
challenge them, which is a
right.
beautiful position to be in. Cause like I don't want it to be flat. I have no freaking desire. Like everything that I formed about my spiritual perceptions, um, to some degree, is reliant on a round Earth model. But
Hmm.
being open to exploring is being open to being wrong in your own perceptions. So I'm going down that path, and I don't know what is the truth right now, and that's also a beautiful position to be in because, again, that breeds continual exploration on the topic and being open to all sides of it. So that's where I'm at.
And I mean, only that can ultimately yield growth.
Mm.
Only if you accept the possibility of failure, the possibility, the necessity. It's like not possibility, the necessity of failure, of disapproval, of I don't know, whatever negative emotion and disappointment you're going to encounter, to accept that and move
Mm.
into this dangerous territory. And then, I mean, only then will you be able to grow. And I've learned that in
Mm.
part from Jordan Peterson. He has been extremely influential to me over the past couple months, and I
I
just
love the way that dude thinks. It's
it's
incredible.
insane. It's I don't know. It's like mental orgasm listening to him. Like
It is, dude. It's like,
fucking
wow,
nuts.
so much logic here. This is incredible.
And the way he articulates himself, I
Oh,
every single time I listen to him, I find it so fascinating. And
yeah.
yeah, it's really great. And the story that he tells over and over again is the story of the dragon that's being confronted, and the dragon has the gold. So the dragon has the precious thing that we are after. And so we need to voluntarily face the unknown, the dragon of chaos. That's what he's always referring to,
Mm,
and then we can find the gold, basically, that
yeah.
the dragon has, and with this in the confines of the dragon, and that's what he's referring to all the time. And I
Yes.
believe if you adapt that way of looking at the world and going about things, then well, only then will you be able to transcend your current state of knowledge. And
Mm,
yeah, that's maybe that.
amen. That's so
Mm,
well said, though. That, like, interesting because that ties back into what we were talking about earlier about the Bible, how
exactly.
communicating via, like mythical things. It's the dragon in front of us, the unknown, the I don't know how this situation is going to go, but ultimately going there and
And that's like
challenging
no,
your
that's
own
no
identity.
science. It's not,
Yeah.
and that's why I find why I find it so difficult to listen to people that bring counter arguments to like the Bible and religious thinking. It's like we're not we're not talking about science here.
No.
It's something that goes so much, that is so much more profound and fundamental to our existence. It's not debating factual things. It's obviously there is no damn dragon. Like that's
Yeah.
not what we're talking about. People didn't know how else to articulate this set of ideas, and they put it in a story, and it illustrates it very beautifully and very elegantly, and you
More
understand that.
fundamentally,
I
like
mean,
epistemology. That's what we're talking about here. It's like
mhm,
the epistemology, how we even gather knowledge and come to our perceptions and beliefs on things. That's what we're
mhm.
talking about here. It's so much more, it's more fundamental than science.
It's way more fundamental than that, because science, and that's a very cool thing, science can only provide description of the factual world, nothing
Yes.
more. It doesn't provide any value judgments. Well, in theory it doesn't. It
No,
shouldn't, at least. It
it
shouldn't.
shouldn't. It
It should. It
shouldn't.
definitely
It is
shouldn't.
right now.
So
But is what we're doing right now even science though? That's another question. So it's
that's another question. But if we just take science as such, then it will only provide you a factual description of the world around you. And I
yeah.
mean, what's good about that? So now you know everything, every single detail about the world. Doesn't tell you anything about how you should be acting in the world. That's
Mm.
again separating fact from interpretation, value, and the conclusion that you make from it.
I'd
Right?
even say that separating knowledge and wisdom too. Like that's knowledge,
Oh yeah.
but knowledge absent of wisdom is dangerous as shit.
Hmm. That's maybe, yeah, putting it, yeah, that's maybe another way of saying it.
Yeah.
Because wisdom is not merely, uh, I don't know, like having the factual knowledge of
Yeah.
whatever topic we're thinking of. That's like that's knowledge, but then wisdom is, yeah, it's maybe exactly that.
The
It's the way you
implications
should
of it.
act.
Wisdom is dissecting the implications of it and
Implications.
what it means, and also how the different points of knowledge tie in together and how it makes people feel. That like
Mm,
that is wisdom.
that's wisdom. Yeah, ultimately it tells you how to act.
Yeah.
And science cannot tell you
No.
that. You need some, you know what you need? You need some framework that transforms, and that's maybe coming back to what we do about that. We need something that transforms the facts into wisdom,
Yeah.
something that does that for us, because there is no objective way of doing it, because fact is a fact, and the value comes from your interpretation of the facts. You know, it doesn't exist in the confinements of the fact.
Mm.
Yeah,
Amen. Maybe we'll just
man.
develop a big computer model for it that we can manipulate, and then that'll be it'll spit out some wisdom for us.
Yeah, that's exactly what
I
I
am
was talking
completely
about.
kidding. I really do not want to do like that. That sounds horrible.
But that's exactly what the point I was trying to make before. It's like this equation would be endlessly complicated and impossible to compute. Because
Yeah,
how do you
impossible.
sequence the factors, the variables, etc.?
Mm.
Oh man, yeah, we got very deep into the fundamentals and the uh, what is underlying the entire ideological engine that was driving the measures and the ideas that were being put forward over the past few years. So I
It
believe
was
that
a
was really
refreshing
fascinating.
conversation, man. It was
But
awesome.
man, do you have some time left?
I have like 5 more minutes probably.
Oh, okay. So then we need to
We
talk
can do a
about.
part 2 though.
We
We
definitely
can do
need
a
to,
part
because
2.
we didn't really talk about you as a person. I would really love to get to know more about where you're coming from. Well, not just in terms of your origins, but just in general, because not
Yeah.
everyone comes to these conclusions. So there were certain things you experienced and certain life events you had to experience and to overcome that helped you to get to that place.
Let's set up a part 2 and I can go over that, and then I can also touch on virology, and maybe you can challenge me and play devil's advocate on it. It could be pretty good conversation.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll need to prepare though. But the thing with virology is a very interesting one because as you maybe know or maybe not, I'm a medical student, so I'm right in
Oh
that field.
wow,
Yes, so I'm right in that dogmatism and
got it.
medical mainstream narrative. So
Yeah,
I'm constantly being challenged by advocate. What would you say by like
devil's
devil's
advocacy. I think you'd see.
advocacy, yeah, by devil's advocate positions all
Yeah,
the time because
that's good though.
that's really good because there's certain things about mainstream medicine that I do not necessarily agree with, especially as far as nutrition is concerned. Like
Oh
there are
yeah.
certain things I don't like. Um, there's a bunch of topics that are kind of difficult, and it's very difficult to discuss them though,
Mm.
because I'm just like asking questions, and they'd be like, "Oh," and to tell that story real quick, because I have a friend also in university, and he was talking to some other students which discovered my Instagram account, and they'd be like, "Hey man, have you heard of that vaxxer like conspiracy theorist
God.
who is believing that meat heals COVID?" I'm thinking like,
Oh
you
my
just
God.
boxed me in a bunch of categories and
Yes.
got rid of any tiny bit of responsibility for having a reasonable conversation that was left. You just got rid of that and you will
Yeah.
never talk to me again. It's so stupid and it's so
It's
difficult to
so
just have
stupid, man.
discussions with people,
It is.
you
It's
know.
so dumb. And like, it's crazy
Dumb.
even on that is like not only will you get it from that side as someone who is a meat eater, you'll also get it within this space from people who are vegan who will automatically dismiss everything you say too. So
Right.
it's
Right.
crazy. It's
It's really
crazy.
crazy, yeah. And I hope, like as you said, that's a funny thing you said because it resonates beautifully with also the way I think. It's like if everyone would only think that way, the world would be better. But we don't want to impose our belief systems on other people. So what do we need to do now?
Yeah, it's such a weird paradox, man. It is a conundrum, as you said. It's good.
So what's your
Oh,
plan about well, like how are you going to try to sort this conundrum to solve it?
oh man, I think the only way you can really solve that conundrum is by continuing to spread it via your own means of projecting your voice to the world. Like, because obviously, I'm not the only one that has shared this wisdom. I mean, many ancient practices throughout time have shared that wisdom, right? So it's just spreading messages and getting it out there. Through various means for people to come across on their own term and
Mm,
dissect themselves and see if they resonate with it. That's the only way. Because obviously, again, I'm not going to force anyone to believe what I believe.
mm.
Um, so it's tough. You just have to continue to project your voice and share your
Yeah, it's like
authentic
leading by
perspective.
example,
Yeah,
something like that, and
yeah,
talking to people. I'm a big believer
exactly.
in having conversations. I think that's really powerful because
Amen.
it's like the antidote to cancel culture. Talking
It
to
is.
people, actually saying what you think and letting
Yeah.
other people to say what they think.
Yes. What a
Because
concept, right? Which is so crazy that we even have to say like, wow, what an idea it is to you say what you think and then
it's
you allow another person to
it's
say what
nuts.
they think. Mind
It's
blowing.
hilarious.
Like, have a conversation with a human being. Wow.
It's like why do I even have to defend free speech? It's like the most
It's so crazy.
preposterous thing
Dude,
possible.
and that's the other thing too. Just real quick aside on free speech, I would rather someone be able to tell me their authentic perceptions no matter how dark they are and like where they're coming from on something and what they think about me than me like having to get them to cover it up because I'm offended, because I'd rather have like authentically know who is against me than have
Right.
people walking around me that are scared to say anything to me because they don't want to offend me, are
Yeah.
scared that I'm going to cancel them, that are pretending to be my friend but they're not.
You know what? I believe the unintended consequences of restricting free speech are many times, several times, and by far more severe and way worse than the consequences of allowing free speech. If we just compare these two
Amen.
scenarios, just restricting it, I believe both yield unintended consequences. That's clear. Like
Amen.
obviously, if everyone says whatever the person thinks, things, you have bad interactions with people, you can feel offended, you can beat each other to death. It's like things can happen, sure. But whatever will happen if you restrict free speech, we have no idea what could happen. And I believe certain things already start manifesting themselves. And it's like, guys, we have history, we have examples going on right now. It's like, what else do you need? So,
dude, yeah, that's spot on. We got to do this again sometime, man. This was good, and I can't believe an hour and a half has already gone by. It's been an awesome conversation.
That was great, and I believe that's a great place to stop now. So, yeah, man, Alec, thanks a lot for agreeing to talk to me.
Absolutely, bro. This was awesome.
That was awesome. Tell the listeners where they can find you, and where I believe you've changed like your Instagram handle 10 times, something like that.
Well, no, I haven't changed my handle 10 times.
Not the handle, but your account.
I've been deleted so many times, and I always am careful to share my Instagram on here because it's like I feel like I'm being jinxed every time I do. So like, because I've been on so many podcasts, we're like, where can they find you? I'm like, oh, I'm on my 5th account. Find me here. And then they'll message me 2 weeks later and say, hey, the people listening to the episode are saying they can't find you. I'm getting a bunch of emails. I'm like, yeah, I was deleted. So I always share my Telegram channel instead.
Okay.
So it's t.me / the way forward. And forward is spelled FWRD. So t.me, or if you just go on the Telegram app and then search Alec Zeck, or search the way forward and spell forward FWRD, should be able to find me there. That's probably where I'm most active now. And then also my organization, Health Freedom for Humanity. You can find me and all of our podcasts and everything that we share on our website, and that's healthfreedomforhumanity.org.
All right. I'll probably put your Instagram in the description, and hopefully just if people will not be able to find you, well, whatever. But I'll put
share it while you can. It's good. Yeah.
I'll
so
share
I guess for now, my Instagram is D_Alec, and that's spelled ALEC _Z. So D_Alec_Z. And that account's already heavily shadow banned. So it's only a matter of time. But it's okay.
Do you even have to do something to get shadow banned? Does it already just happen by itself, all by itself? You create a new account and you get shadow banned like phones.
That. So I have to have 2 phones now, because if I try to log on to Instagram on this phone, it'll automatically delete any account that I log into, because it traces back my device ID. I swear, yeah. I've tested it. So I have a whole separate phone that I use just for Yeah, it's really scary. I wrote an article on some of the censorship I experienced like 7 months ago with facial recognition and stuff like that. It was pretty sketchy. I'll share that with you.
We'll definitely talk another time about that. There's so much stuff to talk about.
Yeah, man, I'd love to return the favor and pick your brain and have you on the way forward at some point too, because you're a deep thinker. So this was a fun conversation.
I would love to. I would really love to.
Be awesome.
That sounds great. That sounds really great. I just love talking to well, I believe everyone is in some sense interesting, but to people that you could have an actual conversation with. Love doing that and going very deep into stuff, like as deep as possible, to the very core.
I always know that I went deep on something if it's like an hour and 40 minutes later and I feel like I only talked for like 15 minutes. So
yes, good. Exactly.
It's good, man.
All right. So thanks again. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it, Maxime.
So let me stop this.